A young woman stood in a boardroom pitching a bold idea that could disrupt an entire industry. But all they saw was inexperience. Minutes later, silence fell. The CEO leaned forward, eyes locked on her, and said one word that changed everything. Boss. Chapter 1. The Room Full of Doubt. Doubt in a boardroom doesn't always sound like disagreement. Often, it's silent. It manifests in body language, in the quick glances exchanged between decision-makers, in subtle smirks and dismissive questions. In the corporate world, particularly when dealing with high-stakes proposals or funding rounds, these reactions often stem less from the substance of an idea and more from the unconscious, or fully conscious, biases of those listening. When a young woman steps into a room traditionally dominated by older men in suits, especially in tech, finance, or venture capital, she isn't just pitching an idea. She is often forced to prove her right to be there in the first place. The room doesn't evaluate her pitch in isolation. It evaluates her first, and her idea second. This dynamic creates an invisible wall, not just of skepticism, but of expectation. She must not only convince them of the potential of her business, but also challenge their assumptions about who gets to lead billion-dollar companies. The room in question may be filled with people who consider themselves progressive and open-minded, but research consistently shows that bias creeps into decision-making, especially under pressure. According to studies from Harvard Business Review and various behavioral science institutions, female entrepreneurs receive significantly less funding than their male counterparts, not because their ideas lack merit, but because the questions they are asked differ fundamentally. Men are asked about potential, growth, and vision. Women are asked about risk, stability, and readiness. It's not about what they're building, it's about whether they are trusted to build it. This is the atmosphere a young woman walks into when she dares to present a groundbreaking idea. The moment she introduces herself, her age and gender begin coloring every word she says, not in her own mind, but in the collective judgment of the room. Experience is assumed absent. Authority is assumed lacking. Passion is interpreted as inexperience, and confidence is often misread as arrogance or naivety. This dynamic leads to what many founders describe as a form of pitch fatigue, not from repeating the pitch, but from having to justify themselves before the pitch even begins. Their male peers walk into similar rooms and are often greeted with enthusiasm or curiosity. They are seen as ambitious, driven, and visionary. Young male founders are often compared to innovators like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. In contrast, young women are rarely given the benefit of such associations. Their ambition is scrutinized. Their potential is underestimated. The stakes are higher, and the patience for imperfection is lower. Another dimension to this is the cultural and psychological pressure of being the only one in the room. If the room lacks diversity, as it often does in executive and investor circles, the young woman pitching may not only feel out of place, but may also be treated as out of place. Tokenism becomes another weight to carry. Instead of being seen as a legitimate leader, she may be viewed as a diversity checkbox, as someone who got into the room not because of what she built, but because the room needed someone like her. This false narrative undermines credibility before a word is even spoken. The bias isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's unspoken and internalized. A partner may genuinely believe they are evaluating the pitch fairly, unaware of the assumptions guiding their thoughts. A board member might be skeptical of the numbers, not because the numbers are flawed, but because they subconsciously expect a young woman to overestimate. This kind of embedded doubt is harder to confront because it's not about logic, it's about instinct, and instincts are shaped by decades of social programming. What makes this phenomenon more insidious is the way it limits innovation. By filtering ideas through biased lenses, rooms like these routinely undervalue the very disruption they claim to seek. Many billion-dollar ideas never get funded, not because the ideas are weak, but because the face presenting them doesn't match the traditional profile of a successful founder. That's not just unfair to the entrepreneur, it's a systemic failure that impacts markets, products, and culture at large. In such environments, emotional resilience becomes as important as business acumen. Founders who face this kind of dismissal learn quickly that their job isn't just to pitch, it's to endure, to navigate skepticism with grace, and to fight for validation that should have been automatic. Every micro-dismissal, a glance at the phone, a question laced with doubt, a patronizing suggestion, becomes another hurdle. And yet, many persist. The room full of doubt is not just one meeting or one investor group. It is symbolic of the broader challenge facing underrepresented entrepreneurs. Until these rooms begin to reflect the diversity of the world outside their walls, this doubt will continue to be the default setting for anyone who doesn't fit the mold. And until decision-makers learn to separate merit from bias, brilliance will continue to be filtered through the narrowest of perspectives. But what happens when someone breaks through anyway? When a founder doesn't wait for the room to believe, but forces it to listen? That's when the narrative begins to shift. Not just for her, but for every room that comes after. Chapter 2. Layers of Bias. Bias in professional environments is rarely overt. Instead, it operates in layers, subtle, often unspoken forces that shape perception, decision-making, and behavior. When a young woman enters a high-stakes environment traditionally dominated by older male executives, she faces not one, but multiple intersecting biases. These biases do not necessarily manifest as overt discrimination, but as compounded doubts and unfair expectations tied to age, gender, appearance, communication style, and perceived authority. At the most obvious level lies gender bias. Decades of corporate conditioning have taught people, consciously or unconsciously, to associate leadership with masculinity. Qualities like assertiveness, decisiveness, and ambition are traditionally considered strengths when exhibited by men, but the same traits are often interpreted negatively when displayed by women. A man who pushes back is seen as confident. A woman who does the same may be labeled as difficult or emotional. This double standard skews the way investors and executives interpret behavior, diminishing the credibility of women even when their performance matches or exceeds that of their male peers. Closely tied to this is age bias. A young woman is often seen as lacking the experience or resilience to handle large-scale ventures. Her insights may be dismissed as naive, even when rooted in data, innovation, or market demand. Unlike her older counterparts, or even young male founders who are romanticized as visionary or disruptive, she is more likely to be perceived as inexperienced rather than pioneering. This perception gap creates a credibility deficit she must overcome before her ideas are even judged on merit. Then comes the appearance bias. In many corporate and investor settings, unconscious judgments are made based on how someone looks or presents themselves. For young women, this can be a double-edged sword. Dressing with authority might be perceived as trying too hard. Dressing casually might be interpreted as unprofessional. There is little room for neutral ground. A young man in a hoodie might be celebrated as a tech genius. A young woman in the same outfit may be seen as underprepared. These inconsistencies have less to do with competence and more to do with deeply embedded societal expectations. Another layer is communication bias, which affects how language and tone are received based on the speaker's gender. Numerous studies have found that women are interrupted more often than men in meetings. Their ideas, when repeated by male colleagues, receive more validation. Additionally, the vocal tone, pitch, and style of delivery, whether confident or collaborative, can be judged more harshly when coming from a woman. A woman expressing uncertainty may be seen as weak, whereas a man expressing the same may be perceived as thoughtful. This distortion in how communication is received creates yet another barrier to equitable participation. Importantly, these biases do not operate in isolation. They intersect, creating compounded disadvantages. A young woman founder, for instance, may simultaneously be seen as inexperienced, too emotional, and not tough enough for the pressure of leadership. Even when her idea is groundbreaking and well-researched, the room's attention often drifts to who she is rather than what she's presenting. Moreover, there is a form of performance bias that subtly penalizes women. While men are often evaluated on potential, what they could achieve, women are judged on proven performance. A young male entrepreneur may be trusted with millions based on vision alone. A young woman is asked to prove every claim, justify every projection, and back every statement with a level of scrutiny rarely applied to her male counterparts. This fundamental difference in evaluation criteria leads to disproportionately fewer funding opportunities for women. Even when women clear all these hurdles, they are sometimes subjected to likability bias. This is the social expectation that women must be warm, agreeable, and non-confrontational to be accepted. If they deviate from this expectation by being direct or assertive, qualities often necessary in high-stakes business.
Chapter 3. The idea that would change everything. Innovation is often dismissed not because it lacks potential, but because it challenges existing frameworks. Disruption, by definition, requires people to rethink what they already believe to be true. When a young woman presents an idea that defies the status quo, the resistance she encounters is not always due to the weakness of the idea. It is often due to the system's discomfort with change, especially when that change is led by someone outside traditional power archetypes. The idea in question wasn't just another startup pitch. It addressed a structural inefficiency in a well-established industry. At its core, it was designed to solve a problem that insiders had learned to accept as normal. That normalization of inefficiency is often where the most valuable innovations are born. When someone from the outside questions why something is still done a certain way, and then builds a better solution. The idea sought to collapse layers of cost, improve access, and leverage technology in a way that hadn't been fully explored in that vertical. One of the primary reasons this concept held billion-dollar potential was its scalability. It wasn't just a niche tool or a single-point solution. It was a platform model capable of expanding horizontally into adjacent markets. Scalability is a critical factor for institutional investors, as it signals long-term growth without requiring equivalent increases in operational costs. Her model emphasized automation, digital integration, and data optimization, three pillars that align with high growth potential and recurring revenue structures. These are not vanity metrics. They are the foundation of a sustainable and defensible business model. In addition, the idea incorporated a customer-first approach, something surprisingly rare in legacy industries. Many entrenched sectors become too inward-looking, optimizing for internal processes while neglecting the user experience. Her solution flipped that. It prioritized accessibility, ease of use, and transparency, characteristics that align with the behavioral expectations of modern consumers. This product-market alignment was strong, and early data supported it. Increased engagement, reduced churn, and high Net Promoter Scores, NPS. These indicators suggested not only market acceptance, but also emotional resonance, a powerful factor in brand loyalty and long-term adoption. Another layer of the idea's strength was its data-centric foundation. In the current economy, data is not just a byproduct, it's an asset. Her model didn't simply provide a service, it also captured valuable user data that could be analyzed to improve performance, personalize experiences, and unlock secondary revenue streams. This kind of built-in intelligence made the platform not only functional, but adaptive, capable of learning and evolving with user behavior. In hindsight, the reluctance to embrace the idea reflected more on the evaluators than the concept itself. Innovation demands open-mindedness. When judgment is clouded by bias, opportunity is often lost. But when someone recognizes the full weight of a well-designed, scalable, and timely idea, no matter who presents it, that's when real value creation begins. Chapter 4. The CEO's Unexpected Move. In hierarchical and high-stakes environments, such as corporate boardrooms or investment meetings, decisions are often made through a combination of consensus, precedent, and leadership cues. Among all the participants in such settings, the most influential voice is typically the most senior one, often the CEO. This individual's opinion not only carries weight, but also often dictates the outcome, particularly when others in the room are uncertain or divided. That is why the CEO's decision to back an underestimated founder against the prevailing sentiment in the room was both unconventional and pivotal. When others in the room react with skepticism or dismissal, they typically do so out of habit, groupthink, or an unwillingness to risk social capital. Challenging a dominant narrative can carry consequences, reputational, relational, or professional. Most decision-makers avoid going against the tone of the room unless they have a compelling reason. That's what makes the CEO's move significant, not simply because he saw potential in the idea, but because he chose to openly contradict the bias-driven inertia of the room. The CEO's decision-making process in such situations is rarely impulsive. Senior executives are trained to assess opportunities not just in terms of immediate outcomes, but also in terms of long-term strategic alignment. It is likely that the CEO was operating on a different analytical framework, one that recognized the business fundamentals, market timing, and technical scalability of the pitch, rather than filtering it through surface-level assumptions tied to the founder's identity. By aligning the idea with strategic trends, operational gaps, and market opportunities, the CEO likely saw what others missed: not only the viability of the concept, but the strategic advantage of backing it early. What often goes unnoticed in such moves is the signal value of a CEO's support. When a senior leader validates a proposal, especially one that has been discounted by others, it reframes the entire conversation. It compels others to reconsider their assumptions. It introduces a new evaluative lens. If someone with deep experience and significant decision-making authority is willing to bet on this idea, perhaps others should re-examine their stance. This effect is pronounced in environments driven by perception, such as venture capital or executive decision forums, where fear of missing out, FOMO, can drive reversals in opinion. The CEO's endorsement, however, did more than just shift the mood. It restructured the power dynamics. By calling the founder boss, he wasn't just offering casual praise. He was making a public statement about agency, authority, and respect. In environments where young women are often seen as apprentices or assistants, rather than originators or leaders, such language functions as a deliberate reordering of hierarchy. It disrupts the traditional view of who holds power and who deserves it. That single word reframed the founder not as a novice to be evaluated. In summary, the CEO's unexpected move wasn't just about validating an idea. It was a multi-layered leadership decision that challenged bias, reframed power, and opened the door for transformational opportunity. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is not speak the loudest, but say the right word at the right moment. Chapter 5. The Rise of the Boss. The true impact of a pivotal moment is not measured by applause in the room, but by the ripple effects it creates afterward. The CEO's decisive endorsement, marked by the simple but profound declaration of boss, became more than a statement of respect. It became a turning point in narrative, perception, and positioning. From that moment onward, the founder ceased being just another underestimated entrepreneur. She became a signal of change, authority, and validation. The aftermath of such a public shift in dynamics creates a cascading effect. First, it repositions the individual within the industry. A founder who was once doubted now becomes a subject of interest. Curiosity replaces skepticism. Those who initially hesitated begin reaching out, not necessarily because their views changed, but because leadership changed the lens through which they evaluated her. In industries where influence is amplified by endorsements, the backing of a high-level executive can convert silence into buzz and dismissal into demand. The visibility that followed was not manufactured. It was earned. Media platforms, always hungry for narratives that challenge the norm, gravitated toward the story. The arc of being laughed out of the room, only to be called boss by a CEO, was too compelling to ignore. In a media landscape increasingly shaped by authenticity and contrast, her story exemplified both. The virality of the moment wasn't about sensationalism. It resonated because it revealed the fragility of perception and the strength of resolve. However, visibility alone is not success. The real rise comes through capitalization on that momentum. The shift in perception created new opportunities. Meetings that had previously been closed off were now open. Investors who had once expressed doubts became eager to revisit the conversation. This turnaround reflects a larger truth about the venture ecosystem. Social proof often drives decisions more than due diligence. When someone with status deems an idea credible, others follow, not purely based on logic, but on perceived consensus and reduced individual risk. With renewed interest came increased leverage. The founder now had the ability to choose her partners, not plead for them. This reversal in dynamic is critical in startup development. The quality of funding is as important as the quantity. Capital that comes attached with strategic value, long-term alignment, and operational support can accelerate growth exponentially. She was now in a position to negotiate not only valuation, but vision, ensuring that the trajectory of the company aligned with her values and leadership style. In the end, the title didn't define her, the work did. But that single word marked the shift from doubt to recognition, from outsider to leader. Her rise illustrates not just what is possible when one person believes, but what becomes inevitable when a system finally starts to listen. And while the room had once laughed, it now leaned in, not out of politeness, but out of necessity. The rise of the boss was not about vengeance or validation. It was about redefining leadership on her own terms and showing that authority, when earned, doesn't need permission. Subscribe this channel for more videos. Thanks for watching.